House of the Dragon Season 2 has been a collection of incredible moments mixed in with a bunch of amateurish decisions being made by irritating characters. Does the finale shine out the clearer or fall into the depths that Season 1 Episode 9 began? Well, it's a bit of both. But just because nothing comes to pass in this episode isn't the problem in and of itself. It's how they crafted this episode into being a glorified teaser for Season 3. We meet Thailand, who's been sent to try and broker a deal to stop the blockade, and in return give the Triarchy the Stepstones. But first he needs to prove himself to the commander of the fleet, who is played by Philosophy Tube, yay! The writers decide to add a cringe line as a reference to that fact.
What sort of man are you? A poet? A philosopher?
That's a fake laugh.
It's real!
We're then told that Lohar won't sail with Thailand unless he can be bested in a fight in the mud. We're in the finale and we're spending our time having a mud fight. I understand that Thailand needs to gain favour with these pirates, but it seems an odd way of portraying that when time could be spent elsewhere, especially when this episode has a problem of not knowing when to cut things and just show us the end result. That's not to say that we could have spent the time having them show Aemon burning Sharp Point instead, because it wasn't absolutely necessary that we see that happen. But to swap that scene for some silly slipping around in the mud seems odd. That choice is compounded by how Rhaena's been running around near the Eyrie for what must have been hours, if not days, and no one seems to be searching for her. She just slipped away at the end of the last episode, and nobody realised or seems to be stressing that she's been missing for so long. There would surely be a massive search party for one of the heirs of Driftmark. But no, because apparently dragons are more important. Provided that something comes of this by the end of the season, it won't be the biggest problem. By all means, have Rhaena not be able to find and claim the dragon immediately, because otherwise the sequence would lack any tension, and subsequently wouldn't garner any investment from the viewer, and would diminish the achievement of claiming a dragon at all. But don't just string the audience along to no end because it doesn't fit with the runtime or the plan for Season 3. Otherwise, the episode as a whole will be a lot of setups without any payoffs. And when this is your format for a season finale, a finale that we won't get to see the repercussions of for another 2 years, you're going to irritate a lot of people. At this point, we've theorised for 2 episodes that Rhaena will eventually find and claim this dragon, but to just have the season end without that being paid off, and for every scene to be covering the same thing, it feels deceptive on the part of the writers. It's the expected thing to have Rhaena claim the dragon, but instead they leave us waiting. It might be because we just had the previous episode end with the claiming of Vermithor and Silverwing, but that shouldn't mean we don't get to see the end result of the interaction with Sheepstealer. That way the season would have some more closure to it, rather than forcing a prolonged sequence just to postpone what we know to be inevitable. With that in mind, Daemon is one of the only characters to get a major payoff this episode. He's spent most of the season being confronted with visions of not only what he initially wanted, but what being king will do to him. And so when Alfred says that they need a king to win the war, we get a moment where despite everything Daemon has experienced through the season, he is still tempted to raise the banners in his name rather than in Rhaenyra's, something that will come to a head when he is next met by Alice. The work Alice has done to make Daemon question himself is contextualised fully when he gets shown the future and what they have to fight for. His inner turmoil is quashed when he realises that Viserys' choice to name Rhaenyra his heir was based in fear of what Aegon the Conqueror warned them about, and that he must come to terms with the role he must play rather than play fiddle to these compulsions that drive his judgments. In this moment, he comes to realise what he must do and why he must do it, not for his own benefit, but for the realm's. And we get a revelation for all of Helena's weird comments through the last 2 seasons.
I'm afraid, not the dragons, the rats.
We also finally get a scene with Rhaenyra and Corlys. Being Rhaenyra's hand, a conversation like this should have come much earlier. Maybe they could have come in place of all those shit scenes with the White Worm. Then her awful dialogue could have been replaced with 2 intelligent characters that come up with plans that are clever, instead of the White Worm suggesting a really good thing to do every episode, despite the fact that she shouldn't even be in the position to make those suggestions. So when we get the scene between Rhaenyra and Mysaria, it once again lacks any subtlety as the characters very clearly outline what the state of things are. They don't let the viewer work it out from the context of the other scenes. This is something that has plagued almost every scene with Mysaria, and it's good to see they don't break that tradition in the finale. At 53 minutes into the episode, we almost got away with not having an appearance from her, but as if the showrunners were mocking us, we get a slow pan round Rhaenyra's head to reveal the lamest character from the whole season. If Massaria was swapped out for Corlys, we might have had a conversation that didn't repeat to us that everything Rhaenyra has done has been great, and that the gods ordained her decisions. Corlys could even point out that many of her indecisions could have been avoided and subsequently reaped better rewards. Instead, the White Worm persists in her endless endearment towards someone she's known for 2 weeks and has become trusted around unjustifiably. We then cut to the last meaningful scene of the episode between Alicent and Rhaenyra. This scene goes on for around 8 minutes, and in those 8 minutes they craft the biggest logistical mishap of the season. Firstly, the Kingsguard wouldn't allow Alicent to visit Dragonstone. What kind of conversation did they have for Alicent to convince him that coming here was a good idea? The Kingsguard would do everything in his power to argue the counter, since coming to Dragonstone appears antithetical to his job of keeping Alicent safe. Even if we let that slide, Alicent would still be imprisoned as soon as she arrived, and then would only be met in the cells like Massaria was in episode 1. The guards also wouldn't so obediently leave the room when Alicent runs the risk of being a real and prevalent threat to the safety of the Queen, but they needed the room to be empty for aesthetic reasons, so never mind. Alicent agrees to have Aegon publicly executed, but then fails to realise that in taking King's Landing, the event would need to end in the deaths of everyone else, not just Aegon. Alicent is naive for thinking everyone else will be fine. Anyone with any importance in the Red Keep would be taken prisoner and then likely killed for treason against the crown. That not only means Helena too, but it also means the children. If anyone is left as a possible heir, Rhaenyra's claim is at risk, and that will breed rebellion. But I suppose Alicent just forgot that very important detail. All of this falls apart if you do an ounce of thought regarding the wider variables that are in play. Did Alicent forget that the war doesn't end with the death of Aegon, or do the writers just prescribe her with selective intelligence whenever the plot demands it? Olivia Cook might be doing a fantastic job at selling the emotion of the scene, but that doesn't absolve the deficient writing on display. And to have this be what makes up the final exchange of the season really is salt in the wound. We're also basically confirming here that the coming events will cause casualties, but we already know that. The meta has been creeping in at every possible moment to remind us that many of these characters won't make it past the end of the show, which is especially obvious when you think for a moment about where the dragons have gone by the time Game of Thrones starts. I suppose the writers were going for a sort of poetic end to the season, much like how episode 3 ended with a secret chat between Rhaenyra and Alicent before a defining battle took place. The same is happening here. But when last time Alicent came to a realization that she'd made a mistake, this time she's grasping at straws to do something that makes no difference. But I guess if some pseudo-emotional scene rounds out the season, then that's good enough for the writers. But the episode made me feel all warm inside and pumped up for season 3, and oh no, I've shit my pants.
This is a film about space wizards.
Putting Rhaenyra on the throne seems secondary to all of the other variables in play. The massive armies are all still travelling to fight each other. If Rhaenyra sneaks in and takes the throne, that doesn't stop the marching of the armies or the war. The question of succession still remains. Aemond being away from King's Landing at the time is one thing, but that doesn't neutralise the threat of him and his dragon. Vhagar is still a danger. All of the other dragons on the green side are still a danger. Putting Rhaenyra on the throne only moves the location of the fight. It doesn't solve any of the things that the season has bothered to set up. The dragons will still fight. The armies will still fight. People will still die. Rhaenyra would be forcing her to give over more information beyond Aemond not being there, and shouldn't be letting Alicent leave until she has learned everything that she can from her. One conversation laying out a bargain doesn't seem like nearly enough to gain. There would also be outrage from everyone on the island to convince Rhaenyra to stop her from wandering around freely. She's committed treason. There's no coming back from that. And don't give me the "she's wearing a hood so it's fine" excuse. Her face is showing, and all it takes is for someone to walk towards her and ask where she's going before all hell breaks loose and she's imprisoned for real. Consequences in season 2 are mostly acknowledged, but it seems their application is a bit flimsy and only come into play when the writers want a particular payoff. Otherwise, they pretend they don't exist. It's not inherently bad that the season ends on a cliffhanger and no battle starting, but to spend the episode doing a lot of unnecessary or nonsensical scenes just so that we could pad the runtime to try and justify why the battle couldn't be fit into this season is infuriating. Having a 5-minute sequence showing where all the factions are heading is a waste of time, since from the context of the season, we all know where they're going. If these events happen to occur anywhere else in the season or episode, then we could have just cut to the point where everyone is where they want to be at. Nothing is gained by showing us that all the pieces are moving into position, because we already knew that from each of their previous scenes. Instead, we get some very ponderous shots that tell us that war is coming. But we know war is coming. It's been on its way all season. Season 1 ended with war coming, and now Season 2 has ended in a similar way. Yes, we needed the setup for where all the armies and characters would be by the time everyone has raised their banners, but to do this in a season where we only got one major battle at the midway point is deceiving. We get to see Rhaena trying to find Sheepstealer twice during this sequence. Once where she's running, and another where she's actually come across the dragon. This is all she's done, and we don't even get to see her claim it. We knew she was going to find the dragon eventually, and then try to claim it, but the episode strung us along to have nothing happen. Just combine the scenes into a single minute-long sequence, and end it with her claiming the dragon, because otherwise, this way of doing things just feels like a waste of time. The only completed arcs or payoffs we got were Daemon's decision to fight for Rhaenyra rather than for himself, and how Helena fits into the wider narrative, which was probably the high point for the episode, but that shouldn't be it for a season finale. It's not bad that we only had one battle all season. After all, Game of Thrones didn't have a major fight until the end of season 2, but when the whole season is geared towards the coming conflict, and that conflict never arrives, then we have a problem. It seemed like after a 3-episode build-up and then a culmination on episode 4, the second half of the season would play out in a similar way, with episodes 5, 6 and 7 acting as setup, with the finale being where all that comes to a head. With spinning this story into 4 seasons instead of 3, some liberties had to be taken, even if that meant a dip in quality for the end of season 2.